When you were a child, you probably had a dream job. Imagine that feeling of working away for years to try and prove yourself. After almost 2 decades of toiling away, you finally achieve your dream and get that job. And then, just after 3 months, it seems the entire management team is against you, the world is talking about how bad you are, and that dream that you had has turned into a nightmare that comes to an unceremonious end when you get fired to the sound of a loud cheer as people celebrate the return of someone else. This is what happened to Dutch Formula 1 driver Nyck de Vries. Nick de Vries had a bad time in Formula 1. He joined the AlphaTauri F1 team at the start of this season, and now his career is over before he even got a chance to complete a full season. The questions I want answered in this video is: how has this happened? Is the criticism actually warranted? And who is responsible for the failure of Nyck de Vries? Let's start with Nyck de Vries and ask the question: did he actually deserve an F1 race seat? De Vries started out the same way the majority of F1 drivers do, in go-karting, making his debut in 2004. Then in 2006 and 2007, he competed in 7 different karting series, coming second in 6 of them and third in the other one. In 2008, he would win the Junior German Karting Championship and the WSK International Series for the 3rd tier of karting. He would continue to make his way up the karting world before winning the FIA Karting World Championship in 2010, and in 2011 he would win it again. In 2012, he would move to single-seater racing with a move to Formula Renault Euro Cup, where he would get a podium on his debut, finishing just 0.678 seconds behind winner Nyck de Vries, who was in his 2nd full year at Eurocup. Over his first 2 seasons in Eurocup, de Vries would win 2 races, get 7 podiums, and finish 5th in the championship both times. And then in his 3rd year, he would take part in Formula Renault 2.0 and Formula Renault 2.0 Alps, where out of the 28 races he competed in, he won 14 and had 22 podiums, winning both championships. In 2015, he would move to Formula Renault 3.5, where he was on the podium 5 times and would win the final race of the year, finishing 3rd in the standings before moving to GP3 in 2016. GP3 is now known as Formula 3 and is the feeder series used for talents to prove themselves before they make their way into Formula 2 and then eventually the pinnacle, which is Formula 1. In his debut year, he would achieve 5 podiums, 2 wins and 1 pole position, finishing 5th in the championship. This would be good enough to grab the attention of Formula 2, where de Vries would race in 2017, where he would get his first win at Monaco. That would be his only win this year, but he would get 5 podiums and finish 7th overall, 2nd out of the rookies. He would continue in F2 in 2018, winning 3 races and getting 6 podiums, finishing 4th in the championship, before entering his 3rd and final season of F2, where he would win the championship with 4 wins. Now, when you win the Formula 2 championship, that normally means that for the very next season you'll be competing in Formula 1. In 2018, George Russell won the Formula 2 championship, and the next year he was in F1 with Williams. In 2017, Charles Leclerc won the Formula 2 championship, and the next year he was in F1 with Alfa Romeo. Pierre Gasly won the championship in 2016 when it was called GP2, and that very next year he made his F1 debut with Toro Rosso. In fact, out of the previous 14 Formula 2 and GP2 champions, only 4 had not featured on the F1 grid the next year. So now it was Nyck de Vries' time to shine. Except it wasn't. The way modern Formula 1 works is that a driver is found when they are very young and signed up to a young driver program for a major Formula 1 team. That young driver program sees them through their feeder series until they're ready to compete in Formula 1 when they join the grid with the team that they originally signed for as a child all those years ago. This is what happened to Nyck de Vries. When he won the Karting World Championship in 2010, he was approached by McLaren. In 2010, McLaren had just finished second in the Formula 1 Constructors' Championship and had 2 World Championship drivers on the team in the form of Jenson Button, who had won the world title the year before for the Brawn team, and Lewis Hamilton, who was just 2 years removed from winning the World Championship for McLaren after coming through the McLaren Young Driver Programme himself. De Vries stayed in the McLaren Young Driver Programme for 9 years, and when his time came for the promotion to the McLaren F1 seat, it was met with a resounding no. McLaren had a very strong partnership in Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, who would be entering their second year with the team, after just achieving McLaren's best Constructors' Championship position in 7 years. So there was no room for De Vries to join the team. And of all the other teams filling their available seats with their own driver programs, there was nowhere in Formula 1 for Nyck de Vries in 2020. So in need of somewhere to go to keep his racing career alive, Nyck de Vries would turn to Formula E, the all-electric single-seater racing series which was about to start its 6th season. Nyck would join the Mercedes-Benz Formula E team, as well as joining the Mercedes Young Driver Academy in order to keep his F1 dreams alive. Mercedes would finish third in that year's Formula E Championship, and at the end of the season he would take part in the Young Drivers Test for the Mercedes Formula 1 team. For the 2021 season, Nyck would get off to the best possible start, getting pole in the first race of the season and going on to lead every lap en route to his first ever Formula E win. It would be a mixed year for Nyck though, but in the final race he would finish 8th, meaning that was good enough for him to win the Formula E World Championship, technically meaning he is the first ever Dutch world champion. He would continue competing in Formula E in 2022, but his main role that year became Mercedes reserve driver, his main duty being standing over the shoulder of Toto Wolff, a duty that is now fulfilled by Mick Schumacher. As part of the Mercedes reserve role, he also became reserve driver for all the teams that use Mercedes engines, which were Williams, Aston Martin, and Nyck's old friends at McLaren. At the Spanish Grand Prix of 2022, he would take Alex Albon's place in the Williams for Practice 2, and he would take Lewis Hamilton's place in the Mercedes for Practice 1 of the French Grand Prix. And then he would take Sebastian Vettel's place in the Aston Martin during Practice 1 of the Italian Grand Prix. But at that weekend, Nyck de Vries would receive a much bigger role. On Saturday morning, Williams driver Alex Albon was ruled out with appendicitis, and Nyck de Vries got the call up to replace him for the remainder of the weekend, meaning he would finally make his F1 debut. He managed to get through the first stage of qualifying and eventually would qualify 13th ahead of his teammate Nicholas Latifi. After multiple drivers received penalties due to engine element changes, Nyck would be promoted to 8th on the grid. He would finish the race in 9th, scoring 2 points for the Williams team, only the 4th time the Williams team had scored points that year out of the previous 16 races. It also meant that Nyck de Vries now ranked 20th in the F1 World Championship, beating Nicholas Latifi, who'd been competing all year. After this, there was some interest in De Vries for a full-time F1 seat. Alpine gave him a private test drive, but it would be the AlphaTauri team who would come through and offer him a contract for the 2023 season, meaning that Nyck de Vries was finally an F1 driver. So to answer the question of does Nyck de Vries deserve an F1 seat, I think the answer has to be an absolute yes. So the next question is, what on earth happened this year? De Vries started the season with a lot of hype. The head of the Red Bull Young Driver Programme, Helmut Marko, stating that he should be the team leader in AlphaTauri over the more experienced teammate Yuki Tsunoda for 2023. But it would all go wrong in his very first official qualifying session, where he qualified dead last, although he would be lifted to P19 after Pierre Gasly's fastest lap time got deleted due to track limits. The race would go better for him, gaining a few positions to eventually finish 14th. Then in the second race of that year, the team elected to change his power unit during the final practice session of the weekend, losing an hour of on-track time, at a track he had never competed at before. In qualifying, he would have a big spin on his first timed lap, but would be able to recover to qualify 18th. Still not great, but he was able to beat Lando Norris and Logan Sargeant, and once again in the race he was able to regain some positions in order to finish another 14th place. At the Australian Grand Prix, de Vries would make it out of Q1 for the first time, but would be eliminated in Q2, qualifying 15th. In a chaotic race, Nyck was 16th on the final restart when Logan Sargeant ran into the back of him, ending his race while his teammate would finish 10th, bringing home AlphaTauri's first point of the season. After the first 3 races, his rookie season wasn't anything to write home about, but it wasn't disastrous. That was about to change though, at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. It would start well for him, finishing 6th in the one and only practice session, but when qualifying came around he would hit the wall before being able to set a qualifying time and start last. Then in the sprint shootout he wouldn't hit the wall, but he would still qualify last, with a margin of 1.299 seconds between him and 19th place. To truly put that into perspective, there was a gap of 1.222 seconds between the top 11 in the exact same session. In the actual sprint race, his teammate had to retire, but Nyck would make it to the end of the race, once again in 14th place. Then finally on race day, Nyck de Vries would once again find the wall and not finish the race. Meanwhile, Yuki Tsunoda would finish 10th again, getting another point for the team. Up next was Miami, and for the very first time, Nyck would out-qualify his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda qualifying 17th, whereas Nyck would make it into Q2 and he would finish 15th, but it would be the other way round in the race, Yuki finishing 11th and Nyck having to settle for 18th after a crash at the start. Monaco would be the shining light of Nyck's rookie season. He would qualify a career high of 12th, and in the race, in changing conditions, he was able to maintain the position, finishing 12th, ahead of his teammate who struggled in the rain. In Spain, Nyck would struggle in qualifying, spinning multiple times, but was still able to out-qualify his teammate for only the second time, although once again in the race, Yuki would have the better of Nyck. The same would happen in Canada, with Nyck out-qualifying Yuki, but then Yuki getting the better of Nyck on the Sunday, and in Austria, Nyck would once again qualify last for the race, although in the sprint he was able to qualify 14th, although in the race he would finish 18th. And in the main race on Sunday, Nyck beat his teammate for the second time, finishing 17th to Yuki's 19th. Then we go to Silverstone. We didn't know that at the time, but this would be Nyck's final race. A race that saw both Alphas out in Q1, with Yuki ahead of Nyck, and then Yuki would also beat Nyck in the race, but only by a fine margin of 1.9 seconds. So it wasn't the best rookie year for Nyck, but has it really been that bad? When Nyck got fired, he had a qualifying record of 3-7 and a race record of 1-5 against his teammates when both cars finished the race. And while he hasn't scored any points yet, the car is nowhere near the position to be able to regularly score points. So I thought we should compare Nyck's teammate record to that of some of the most recent rookies at this point of their rookie season. Out of the last 10 full-time rookies, only one of them had more points than their teammate after 10 races, and out of those rookies, only 4 of them had a better qualifying record than their teammate, and only 3 of them had a better race record than their teammates. 6 of them had a better qualifying record than Nyck does, and 8 of them had a better race record when both cars finished the race. But I still don't think that his stats are that bad. In fact, one of the worst performing rookies out of the last 10 was Yuki Tsunoda. After 10 races, he was 29 points behind his teammate. He had never beaten him in qualifying and only managed to beat him one time in a race where both cars finished. So the next question is, why did Red Bull give Yuki so much time to improve but didn't give it to Nyck? And to answer that question, we have to take a look at the AlphaTauri team in general. The AlphaTauri team is the little sister team of the Red Bull Racing team. You may remember earlier we discussed young driver racing programs, And Red Bull's Young Driver Racing program might just be the best ever. In total, Red Bull's Young Driver program is responsible for 6 world titles, soon to be 7, and 98 race wins. Since the inception of the Red Bull Young Driver program in 2001, they have brought 15 drivers into Formula 1. By comparison, Renault in that time have brought in 5, Ferrari have brought in 4, and McLaren have brought in 4. An integral part of the Red Bull Young Driver program is the AlphaTauri team, which also used to be known as Toro Rosso. The team is seen as the finishing school, where drivers can prove that they can make it in Formula 1 before moving up to the main Red Bull team. In their history, Red Bull have had 12 drivers. Half of them have also driven for the AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso team. And from 2014 to 2020, every driver that drove for Red Bull had some time in the junior team. So to understand what's going on in AlphaTauri, you have to look at what's happening in the Red Bull team. Yuki made his debut in 2021, and at that time the drivers of the Red Bull team were Max Verstappen, the prodigy of the Red Bull Junior team, who was about to be crowned as world champion for the first time, and their other driver was Sergio Perez, who had just joined the team as the first non-Red Bull Junior since Mark Webber in 2007, after Sergio had had an incredible 2020 season with the Racing Point team, where he had won his first race and finished 4th in the championship, just being beaten by Verstappen and the 2 Mercedes drivers. This put the Red Bull team in a very strong position with their drivers, but if something was to go wrong, Red Bull had a backup in the AlphaTauri team in the form of Pierre Gasly. Gasly had been given the call up to the top team 2 years prior, but it had not gone well, and he had since been demoted back down to the AlphaTauri team. But since then he had drastically improved, and would go on to get 3 podiums, including the team's first win in 12 years, and was consistently outperforming the car and any teammate he'd been paired with. So if Sergio Perez, or God forbid Max Verstappen, did underperform and Red Bull needed someone, they had Gasly on speed dial. Then at the end of the 2022 season, Gasly got tired of waiting for the call-up and left to join the Alpine team. This was the move that prompted AlphaTauri to sign Nyck de Vries as his replacement. Then, a really big problem started to emerge. Sergio Perez started to underperform. Not massively underperform, but cracks started to show. In the 3rd race of this year, a mistake in qualifying saw him qualify without a time and start last. In Monaco, another mistake saw him qualify last again, and this time he wasn't able to fight through the grid and would finish 16th. This started a streak where Perez would not make it into Q3 for 5 races in a row, and at the British Grand Prix he wasn't even able to make it into Q2. Thankfully, Max Verstappen was performing so well that he could win the Constructors' Championship by himself, but just like many times before when cracks started to show in the performance of one of the Red Bull drivers, the higher-ups looked to the AlphaTauri team for the replacement. But instead of seeing the likes of Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo or Pierre Gasly waiting for the call-up, what they were welcomed with were 2 of the worst performing rookies of the last few years. While Yuki had improved since his rookie year, he was still not on the level to move up to the Red Bull team, especially as they were now the best team on the grid, and Nick was absolutely not ready. So the team that's entire purpose was to prepare their drivers to be ready to be called up now had no drivers that were ready to be called up. So one of them has to go, and that one is Nyck de Vries. But now we have to finally face the biggest elephant in the room about Nyck de Vries. And that's that he's old. Like really old. Like really, really old. He's 28. That's older than me, and I'm very old. Now you may be thinking that 28 is not very old, but in sport, being 28 is ancient. In fact, 12 of the drivers who are currently on the F1 grid are younger than Nyck de Vries, the only ones older than him being Sainz, Magnussen, Perez, Bottas, Hülkenberg, Hamilton and Alonso, and Alonso's older than the sun. By the time Lewis Hamilton was 28, he was a world champion. By the time Michael Schumacher was 28, he was a two-time world champion. By the time Sebastian Vettel was 28, he was a four-time world champion. By the time Max Verstappen was 28, he was a... well, we don't know, because he's only 25. Out of the current grid, there are 10 race winners. 9 of them won that race before they were 28. So, the real question is, why the hell did Red Bull sign this guy to their junior team? Now, in this video, we've had a few tangents here and there. And the next one that I'm about to do is one of the biggest tangents I think I'll ever do. But if you could please stick with me through it, because I think when we get to the end of the tangents, it will all make sense. So just trust me on that. Right, here we go. Here we go. So the real question is, why the hell did Red Bull sign this guy to their junior team? And to answer that question, we have to discuss the acting careers of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. Trust me, please. This was one of the most intense rivalries in show business. Arnold had Conan the Barbarian, Stallone had Rocky. Arnie had Predator, Stallone had Rambo. Arnie had The Terminator, Stallone had the other Rocky and Rambo films. Anyway, once Arnie was approached to do a film called Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, he read the script and saw that it was absolutely awful. So he gave his good buddy Sylvester Stallone a call and told him that the script he had just read was incredible and couldn't wait to work on it. When the call ended, Sylvester Stallone instantly called his agent to make sure that he got that job rather than Arnie, because Arnie was the competition and he couldn't let him have a better script. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot came out in February of 1992 and is regarded as one of the worst films of all time. Now, what does that have to do with Formula 1 and Nyck de Vries? Well, for the last few years, the Red Bull team and the Mercedes team have been in one of the most intense rivalries of all time. And for most of that, Nyck was the Mercedes young driver, to the point that whenever the Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff was shown, Nyck de Vries was never far out of shot. Now, I don't think that Mercedes built up Nyck's ability when they didn't believe in it. In fact, I believe the complete opposite. I think Mercedes were very high on de Vries. But I do believe the reason Red Bull hired him as their driver is so that Mercedes couldn't, because they believed that he was that good. So now I want to go back to the very first question of who is responsible for the failure of Nyck de Vries. And I think there's a few people to point the finger at. Firstly, I think we can point blame towards Helmut Marko for signing him when there were so many other young Red Bull drivers to choose from, just so that Mercedes couldn't have him. You could point the blame towards McLaren for bringing him through his junior career to the point where he was ready for F1 and then just completely ditching him. You could blame Sergio Perez for not being able to get one of the most dominant cars in F1 history into Q3 and putting pressure on the AlphaTauri team. You could point blame towards Red Bull for letting someone as talented as Pierre Gasly just go. You could point blame towards Mercedes for not letting him get a proper F1 drive and spend 2 years as a parrot on the shoulder of Toto Wolff. There are a lot of moments across Nyck de Vries' career that led to this exact moment. But one person I don't think you can actually blame is Nyck de Vries. Because as much as he made mistakes and wasn't the best, he was just having a normal rookie year. And I believe if he was given the same time as any other rookie normally is, I think eventually he would have come good. But now, we'll never know. I don't know what's next for Nyck de Vries. Maybe he'll go back to Formula E, maybe he'll go to IndyCar, maybe he'll go back to standing behind Toto Wolff. I don't know what it's going to be. But I hope whatever it is, I hope he's happy, because I imagine the last few months have been absolute hell. But I think the most important thing that we've all learned from this is that Stop or My Mom Will Shoot is a terrible film.